"Don't touch my car!" the billionaire shouted at the homeless black man, not knowing this stranger was about to save his $4.2 million hypercar and change his entire worldview. Smoke poured from the Quantum Apex's engine in the industrial district as tech titan Anthony Wright frantically dialed his phone. Nobody answered. The crowd grew. The proprietary engine unfixable outside the factory continued its death rattle. "Sir, your quantum thrust cooling system has a micro-fracture in the secondary loop," said the disheveled man approaching with hands slightly raised. "I can fix it." Anthony's finger hovered over the security number. How could this man possibly know about technology so classified the manufacturer wouldn't even acknowledge it existed? What hidden genius was standing before him, and why was he living on the streets? In the next 60 seconds, everything Anthony believed about talent, worth, and judgment would shatter completely. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment and subscribe to Beat Stories for moments of extraordinary justice that will change how you see the world. Thomas Johnson hadn't always lived on the streets. 3 years ago, he designed revolutionary cooling systems that transformed aerospace technology and saved countless lives. Now he slept under the open sky, an invisible man to the tech executives who rushed past without a glance. The morning had started like any other. Thomas woke at dawn in his carefully hidden spot behind the abandoned machine shop near Tech Row. He folded his tarp with military precision, a habit from his engineering days when precision meant survival. His routine was methodical: wash up at the public restroom, brush teeth, and head to the library as soon as it opened. Knowledge remained his one connection to his former life. Thomas had been watching the distinctive Quantum Apex for weeks. These hypercars occasionally glided through the neighborhood on their way to the exclusive tech campus. He recognized the engine's unique purr he should, considering he'd helped design its predecessor during his brief consultancy at Aerotech Industries before everything fell apart. MIT graduate, 3 engineering degrees, holder of 7 patents that generated millions for companies that no longer acknowledged his existence. The irony wasn't lost on Thomas that he could recite complex thermodynamic equations but couldn't get past a hiring manager's prejudiced gaze. Overqualified, they said when they bothered to interview him. Not a cultural fit, they muttered when his credentials couldn't be denied. The real reasons hung unspoken in the air. A black man from the wrong side of town. No permanent address. The gap in his employment history after the false accusations that had destroyed his career. Thomas maintained his dignity despite it all. He volunteered teaching science to kids at the homeless shelter 3 nights a week. He read discarded tech journals found in recycling bins outside company headquarters. He kept his mind sharp despite the system designed to dull it. This morning, Thomas had noticed something wrong with the hypercar before it even pulled to the curb. The sound was off a subtle irregularity in the engine's rhythm that only someone intimately familiar with its design would recognize. The micro-fracture was developing in the exact spot the original blueprints had predicted weakness. Thomas had flagged this in his report years ago, but his warnings had been brushed aside by executives eager to meet production deadlines. Now one of those executives stood before a smoking multi-million-dollar testament to Thomas's ignored expertise. Thomas approached cautiously. He'd learned the hard way that his help wasn't always welcome, especially from those who judged books by their covers. His worn clothes and unkempt beard typically triggered security calls faster than his engineering insights triggered respect. He saw recognition flicker in Anthony Wright's eyes, not of Thomas as a person, but of Thomas as a threat. The billionaire's hand tightened around his phone. Thomas knew that gesture well. He'd seen it countless times over the past 3 years. What Anthony couldn't possibly know was that Thomas had once been invited to present at the same tech conferences where Anthony had been a keynote speaker. Their paths had nearly crossed 5 years ago, before Thomas's life imploded over accusations later proven false, but not before his reputation was irreparably damaged. The tech world had a short memory for vindication, but a long one for scandal. Thomas watched the smoke pattern from the hypercar's engine. The color and density told him exactly which components were failing. He could fix it with basic tools and knowledge that apparently hadn't reached the current engineering team. Something compelled him forward despite knowing the likely reception. Maybe it was professional pride. Maybe it was the rare opportunity to prove his worth. Or maybe it was simply that Thomas Johnson, despite everything life had thrown at him, remained a problem solver at heart. Anthony Wright had just ended another fruitless call, his frustration evident as the gathering crowd whispered and pointed at the smoking luxury vehicle. The billionaire's reputation was on the line as much as his investment. Thomas took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Sir, I know what's wrong with your car," he said, keeping his voice steady and professional. "Your quantum thrust cooling system has a micro-fracture in the secondary loop." The words that came next would set in motion a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Little did either man know that this chance encounter would expose not just a flaw in a luxury car, but in the very system that determined who deserved a second chance. Anthony Wright's day was imploding as spectacularly as his hypercar's cooling system. The quantum apex only 17 ever made had chosen the worst possible moment to break down. 3 hours before his presentation to potential investors, 2 miles from the nearest authorized service point, 0 cell reception. "Step back from the vehicle, please," Anthony said, not even looking Thomas in the eye. His voice carried the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. The crowd of onlookers had doubled in size. Phone cameras pointed at the spectacle of the smoking hypercar. Anthony Wright, tech wunderkind and founder of Nexus Innovations, stranded alongside his $4.2 million status symbol. Trending Twitter material within minutes. "Sir, I really can help," Thomas persisted, maintaining a respectful distance. "That specific model has a known issue with the quantum thrust cooling system, the secondary loop." "How would you know anything about this car?" Anthony cut him off, finally looking directly at Thomas. His gaze took in the worn clothes, the unkempt appearance, the reusable grocery bag that contained Thomas's worldly possessions. His expression shifted from frustration to dismissal in an instant. Thomas met his gaze steadily. "Because I helped design the prototype cooling system it's based on." A burst of laughter escaped Anthony's lips, sharp, incredulous cutting. Several onlookers joined in nervously. "Right. And I'm teaching rocket science at community college on weekends." Anthony turned away, focusing on his phone again. "Look, I appreciate you trying to... whatever this is, but this vehicle contains proprietary technology. Even most mechanics can't service it." Thomas didn't move. "The fracture is causing coolant to leak into the tertiary chamber, which is why you're getting that specific shade of blue-gray smoke. If it continues, you'll have catastrophic engine failure in approximately 47 minutes. Anthony froze. The smoke was indeed blue-gray, and the vehicle's diagnostic system had given him a 45-minute warning before permanent damage would occur. "How did you—" he began, then stopped himself. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Did someone put you up to this? Is this some kind of stunt?" A sleek black SUV pulled up. 2 security guards emerged, private security from the nearby tech campus, responding to Anthony's earlier call. "Is there a problem, Mr. Wright?" asked the taller guard, eyeing Thomas with professional suspicion. "This gentleman was just leaving," Anthony replied coldly. "He seems to think he knows something about my car." "I know the Quantum Apex uses a modified version of the Aerotech cooling system," Thomas said quickly. "I know it has a design flaw that was identified in prototype stage but ignored due to production pressures. I know that internal memo XT447 documents the exact issue I'm describing." Anthony's face showed a flash of recognition at the memo number. That was proprietary information, never made public. "How could you possibly—" he began. "Mr. Wright, we should secure the area," interrupted the security guard. "Your vehicle contains valuable intellectual property." Thomas stood his ground. You have approximately 45 minutes before that engine suffers irreparable damage. The service center can't help you. They don't have the parts or expertise for this specific issue, and towing this vehicle in its current condition will only accelerate the damage. Anthony hesitated, visibly torn between dismissing Thomas and the growing realization that this stranger somehow possessed insider knowledge. "Sir," the second security guard addressed Thomas firmly, "I'm going to have to ask you to move along." "Wait," Anthony raised a hand. "You mentioned a memo, XT447. How do you know about that?" "Because I wrote it," Thomas replied simply. 5 years ago, when I was a consulting engineer at Aerotech. My name is Thomas Johnson." For a brief moment, something like recognition flickered across Anthony's face. The name meant something to him, but he couldn't place it. The first security guard moved closer to Thomas. "Sir, final warning. Step away from Mr. Wright and his vehicle." Anthony checked his watch. The manufacturer's roadside assistance was at least 2 hours away. His investor meeting couldn't be rescheduled. The smoke from the engine was growing thicker. "What exactly would you need to fix it?" Anthony asked, ignoring the surprised looks from the security guards. "Basic tools. Most should be in your emergency kit. 20 minutes of uninterrupted work," Thomas replied. Anthony seemed to weigh his limited options. The growing crowd, the irreplaceable vehicle, the crucial meeting, the stranger who somehow knew things he shouldn't. "Mr. Wright, we strongly advise against," the security guard began. "Check his ID first," Anthony interrupted. "Full background." The second guard took Thomas aside while the first spoke quietly into his radio. Thomas cooperated calmly, producing his shelter ID card, the only identification he possessed. When the guard returned, his expression was grim. "No current address, no employment records for the past 3 years. Some kind of incident at his last job. The shelter confirms he stays there occasionally." Anthony's face hardened. He'd taken a risk even considering this option. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding," he said to Thomas, not sounding sorry at all. "My team will handle this." Thomas watched as Anthony turned away, already dismissing him from mind. But what happened next would prove just how wrong first impressions can be, and how quickly fortunes can change when desperation meets opportunity. Anthony's phone rang. He answered immediately, hoping for rescue. His expression fell as he listened. 2 hours? That's not acceptable. The system is giving me less than 40 minutes before permanent damage. He paced, the crowd's whispers growing louder around him. "No, I understand it's proprietary. That's why I bought it from you. There has to be someone closer." Thomas stood quietly, watching as the billionaire's options dwindled in real time. The security guards maintained their position between him and Anthony, but their stance had relaxed slightly as the situation's true nature became clear. "Fine, I'll wait." Anthony ended the call with visible frustration. "Useless!" He looked at his watch again, then at the smoke still steadily rising from the hypercar's engine compartment. The security guards exchanged glances. "Sir," the taller one said, "perhaps we should clear the area. If there's a risk of fire—" "There won't be a fire," Thomas interjected calmly. "The smoke is from coolant vaporizing against the thermal shielding. Fire risk is minimal. The real concern is microscopic damage to the quantum thrust bearings, which will cost approximately $870,000 to replace if they fail completely." All 3 men turned to stare at him. "How do you know the exact replacement cost?" Anthony demanded. "Because I helped calculate the original manufacturing specifications," Thomas replied evenly. "The bearings use a proprietary alloy blend that requires specialized fabrication. Only 2 facilities worldwide can produce them. Lead time is 11 weeks. Anthony's skepticism visibly warred with his growing curiosity. "That information isn't public." "No, it isn't," Thomas agreed. The taller security guard leaned closer to Anthony. "Sir, we could call the police if this person is harassing you." Anthony waved him off, studying Thomas with new intensity. "You said your name is Thomas Johnson?" "Yes. And you claim you worked for Aerotech Industries?" I didn't just work there. I led the thermal dynamics team that developed the original cooling system your car's engine is based on. Thomas spoke without bravado, simply stating facts. Patent number AT5729QX, registered 5 years ago. The Quantum Apex's system is a modified version with the same fundamental architecture. Anthony's eyes widened slightly. That patent number wasn't something anyone outside the industry would know. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you're who you say you are, why are you... He gestured vaguely at Thomas's appearance. Homeless? Thomas supplied the word Anthony was reluctant to say. It's a long story involving false accusations, corporate politics, and racial bias. But right now, what matters is that your car has approximately 35 minutes before permanent damage occurs, and I can fix it. Anthony checked his watch again. The crowd had grown larger. Someone from a local tech blog had arrived and was filming. His investor meeting, where he needed to project absolute success and confidence, was slipping further out of reach with every passing minute. What exactly would you do? Anthony asked, his voice betraying the first hint of consideration. I'd need to access the secondary cooling loop, vent the contaminated coolant, seal the microfracture, and replenish the system. Thomas spoke with the precision of an expert. With your car's emergency kit, and perhaps a few items from that convenience store across the street, I could complete the repair in under 20 minutes. Anthony's disbelief still showed clearly on his face. That's impossible. The manufacturer's engineers claim this repair requires specialized equipment and a controlled environment. They're overcomplicating it, Thomas said. The fundamental issue is simple fluid dynamics. The proprietary nature of the coolant makes them cautious, but there's a straightforward workaround. One of the security guards, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. Sir, I think I recognize this man. He volunteers at the West Side Shelter, teaches engineering classes to kids there. Thomas nodded slightly in acknowledgement. And he knows his stuff? Anthony asked, his resistance beginning to crack. The shelter coordinator says he's some kind of genius, the guard admitted. I didn't make the connection until just now. Anthony paced for a moment, weighing his dwindling options. The smoke hadn't abated. The diagnostic system now showed 31 minutes until critical failure. Show me, he finally said to Thomas. Not the actual repair. Just tell me exactly what's happening in there and what you would do. Thomas nodded and approached the vehicle cautiously. Without touching it, he began a detailed explanation, pointing to specific areas of the engine compartment visible through the vents. The quantum thrust system uses a 3-tier cooling approach, primary, secondary, and tertiary loops, each with progressively higher thermal tolerance. The secondary loop contains a specialized nano-coolant that prevents quantum destabilization in the thrust bearings. The microfracture likely located here, he pointed with precision, is allowing that coolant to leak into the tertiary chamber, where it's vaporizing on contact with the thermal shielding. Anthony's expression shifted from skepticism to astonishment as Thomas continued, describing the exact components, their positions, and the specific metallurgical properties of each part details that only someone intimately familiar with the system would know. The factory repair protocol requires complete disassembly because they assume worst-case contamination, Thomas explained. But with this particular leak pattern, we can isolate the affected section, apply a thermal bond sealant to the fracture, and restore functionality without disassembly. Anthony's tech expertise was sufficient to recognize that Thomas spoke with genuine mastery. Where would you even get thermal bond sealant right now? Thomas smiled slightly for the first time. Your emergency kit should contain basic sealant. Combined with the nanoparticle-infused graphite from a specific brand of pencil lead available at that convenience store, we can create a makeshift version that will hold until you can get a proper repair. Anthony stared at him. You're going to fix my multi-million-dollar hypercar with pencil lead? Graphite with specific density and particle distribution, yes, combined with your emergency sealant and applied under precise conditions. Thomas shrugged. Engineering is about solving problems with available resources. The security guards were now looking at Thomas with something approaching respect. The crowd had quieted, sensing the tension of the moment. Anthony checked the time again. 28 minutes until critical failure. His investor meeting was in less than 3 hours. The manufacturer's team wouldn't arrive in time. This unusual solution was his only option. "If you damage my car," Anthony began. "It's already damaged," Thomas replied calmly, "and getting worse by the minute. The question is whether you'll let me help before it's too late." Anthony took a deep breath, made his decision, and reached for the hood release. "Let's see what you can do with pencil lead and desperation." But the real test was yet to come, and neither man could predict how their lives would be transformed by what happened next. The hood of the quantum apex rose with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a labyrinth of advanced technology. The gathered crowd murmured appreciatively at the rare glimpse inside one of the world's most exclusive vehicles. Thomas approached methodically, his eyes scanning the engine compartment with practiced precision. "I'll need your emergency kit," he said to Anthony. All business now that he'd been given permission to proceed. Anthony retrieved a sleek carbon fiber case from the hypercar's trunk and handed it over. Thomas opened it, quickly assessing the contents. "This will work for most of what we need. One of your security guards will need to get the graphite pencils I mentioned. Stettler Mars Lumograph, 8B grade specifically." The shorter guard looked to Anthony, who nodded his approval. "Be quick about it." As the guard departed, Thomas began organizing the tools he would need. His movements were precise, economical, betraying years of professional experience. Anthony watched with undisguised fascination as this homeless man transformed before his eyes into what was clearly a highly trained engineer. "The microfracture should be visible once I remove this access panel," Thomas explained, selecting a specialized tool from the kit. "The coolant is clear, but it leaves a distinctive residue pattern that will lead us right to the leak." Anthony found himself nodding along. Despite his lingering skepticism, he was impressed by Thomas's confident expertise. "How long did you say you worked at Aerotech?" 3 years as lead thermal engineer, 2 as a consultant after that," Thomas replied without looking up from his work. "Before the incident that ended my career there." "What incident?" Anthony asked. Thomas paused briefly. "A prototype failure was blamed on my team. Investigation later proved it was caused by management overriding our safety protocols, but by then the damage to my reputation was done." His hands returned to their work, steady and sure. "These panels are designed to prevent tampering. May I use your phone's flashlight?" Anthony complied, holding his phone as directed while Thomas carefully detached a small access cover. A faint hissing became audible as the panel came free. "There it is," Thomas said, pointing to an almost microscopic line where vapor was escaping. "Exactly where I predicted. The stress point where the secondary and tertiary systems converge." "That tiny crack is causing all this?" Anthony asked, incredulous. "The cooling system operates under extreme pressure. Even a hairline fracture can—" A sharp voice cut through their conversation. "What the hell is going on here?" A tall man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd, flanked by 2 more security guards. His ID badge identified him as executive security for Tech Horizon, the sprawling campus of tech companies nearby. "Mr. Wright," the man continued, "we received reports of someone tampering with your vehicle. Our CEO asked me to provide immediate assistance." Anthony straightened up. "Reynolds, thank you, but the situation is under control. This gentleman is helping with an emergency repair." Reynolds's gaze swept dismissively over Thomas. "Sir, our security protocol strictly prohibits unauthorized individuals from accessing proprietary technology, especially—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear from his expression. "He knows what he's doing," Anthony insisted, though his voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. "With all due respect, Mr. Wright," Reynolds lowered his voice, "this vehicle contains technology worth millions in intellectual property. We can't allow just anyone to—" I'm not just anyone, Thomas interjected quietly, continuing his work. And we have approximately 18 minutes before irreversible damage occurs. Reynolds stepped closer, his hand moving to Thomas's arm. Sir, I need you to step away from the vehicle now. The returning security guard, clutching a small package from the convenience store, froze at the edge of the scene, uncertain what to do. Reynolds, please, Anthony began, but the security chief cut him off. Mr. Wright, we've had 3 industrial espionage attempts this quarter alone. How do you know this isn't another one? How do you know he hasn't been waiting for an opportunity like this? The seed of doubt that had never fully left Anthony's mind began to grow again. The crowd had swelled further, phones recording everything. His reputation, his investors, his company's security protocols, all were suddenly at risk. I think perhaps we should wait for the manufacturer's team, Anthony said, the confidence draining from his voice. Thomas looked up from his work, his expression perfectly composed despite the sting of the renewed dismissal. In 15 minutes it will be too late. Sir, Reynolds addressed Thomas directly, please step away from the vehicle now or we'll be forced to remove you. Thomas slowly put down the tools and straightened up. Mr. Wright, I understand your position, but I need you to understand something too. He pointed to a specific component deep in the engine compartment. That is the quantum stabilization unit. In approximately 14 minutes, the leaked coolant will reach its critical temperature and cause a cascade failure. When that happens, you won't just need new bearings. You'll need an entirely new engine core. 3 months of work, minimum. Anthony hesitated, visibly torn. Reynolds pressed his advantage. Mr. Wright, we've already called the police. This man has no credentials, no identification, and no authorization to access this technology. For all we know, he could be damaging the vehicle further. I've helped identify the problem at least, Thomas said quietly. Perhaps that will assist the manufacturer's team when they arrive. He began to step back from the vehicle, dignity intact despite the humiliation. The security guard with the pencils finally approached Anthony, speaking in a low voice. Sir, I called the shelter while I was out. They confirmed he teaches engineering there. The coordinator said he's some kind of genius. Former MIT professor or something. The car's diagnostic system chimed an alert. Warning. 12 minutes to critical system failure. With security approaching and his reputation on the line, Thomas made a bold claim that would either vindicate him or confirm everyone's worst assumptions. Mr. Wright, make one call to verify who I am. Just one. Call Dr. Eleanor Chen at Space Tech Industries. Tell her Thomas Johnson is here. The tension in the air was palpable as Anthony considered Thomas's request. Reynolds and his security team stood ready to remove Thomas from the scene. The crowd had grown silent, sensing the drama unfolding before them. Dr. Eleanor Chen, the chief engineer at Space Tech? Anthony asked, surprise evident in his voice. Thomas nodded once. Tell her I'm here. She'll confirm everything I've told you. Anthony hesitated only briefly before pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts. The fact that he had direct access to Space Tech's chief engineer spoke volumes about his own position in the tech world. This is Anthony Wright, he said when the call connected. I apologize for the unexpected call, Dr. Chen, but I have a rather unusual situation. He glanced at Thomas. There's someone here who claims to know you, says his name is Thomas Johnson. The change in Anthony's expression was immediate. His eyes widened as he listened to the response on the other end. The security team exchanged uncertain glances as seconds stretched into a full minute of Anthony listening, occasionally glancing at Thomas with new eyes. Yes, he's right here, Anthony finally said. Would you mind if I put you on speaker? He pressed a button and held the phone between himself and Thomas. Thomas? Thomas Johnson, is that really you? The voice that came through the speaker was clear, professional, and tinged with disbelief. Hello, Eleanor, Thomas replied, a small smile softening his features. It's been a while. 3 years, 4 months, and approximately 22 days, Dr. Chen responded immediately. You disappeared. Completely. We looked for you. It's a long story, Thomas said simply. I'm sure it is. Dr. Chen's voice grew more serious. Anthony, do you understand who you're speaking with? Thomas Johnson is the most brilliant thermal engineer I've ever worked with. His quantum cooling system designs revolutionized our industry. We still use his patents in our latest spacecraft. Anthony's face showed his growing astonishment. He claims he can fix my quantum apex. Says there's a microfracture in the secondary cooling loop. If Thomas says he can fix it, then he can fix it, Dr. Chen replied without hesitation. In fact, he probably designed the system your car is based on. Aerotech licensed his patents for their automotive division after he left. Reynolds, the security chief, shifted uncomfortably. The returning security guard who had brought the pencils now stood protectively near Thomas. His posture subtly changed from suspicion to respect. The thing is, Dr. Chen, Anthony continued, his voice lowered, he appears to be homeless, Thomas supplied calmly when Anthony struggled to find a polite word. I've been living on the streets for the past 3 years, Eleanor. A stunned silence came from the phone. That's not possible. You had offers from every major tech company after the Aerotech incident. I sent you one myself. Like I said, it's a long story. But right now, Mr. Wright's car has approximately 9 minutes before catastrophic failure. With your endorsement, perhaps he'll let me complete the repair. The diagnostic system chimed again as if on cue. Warning, 9 minutes to critical system failure. Anthony, Dr. Chen's voice was now deadly serious. Let Thomas fix your car. Not only is he capable, but he's probably the single most qualified person on the planet to do it. I'd trust him with technology worth billions, let alone a car. Anthony looked at Thomas with new eyes. I don't understand. If you're who she says you are, how did you end up like this? Thomas held his gaze steadily. False accusations, racial profiling, a system that's quick to condemn and slow to exonerate. Once you fall through the cracks with no address, no phone, no credit score, try getting back up. But we can discuss social inequities after we save your car. Anthony nodded, properly chastened. Reynolds, stand down. Dr. Chen, thank you for the confirmation. Wait, Dr. Chen said quickly. Thomas, when this is over, call me. Immediately, I mean it. We have positions waiting for you. Always have. I'll consider it, Thomas replied non-committally. Goodbye, Eleanor. Anthony ended the call and turned to Thomas. I owe you an apology. You owe me the chance to finish what I started, Thomas corrected him, already moving back toward the engine compartment. And those pencils your security guard is holding. The guard quickly handed over the package. Thomas opened it, selecting one specific pencil with the practiced eye of an expert. This will work perfectly. As Thomas returned to work, the crowd's murmuring changed tone from voyeuristic curiosity to something approaching respect. Even Reynolds and his security team had backed off, though they continued to watch with professional interest. How exactly does this work? Anthony asked, genuinely curious now as he watched Thomas carefully remove the graphite core from the pencil. The emergency sealant in your kit is designed for temporary repairs to the primary cooling system, Thomas explained while working. By infusing it with this specific density of graphite nanoparticles, I can create a compound that will bond effectively with the specialized alloy of the secondary loop. His hands moved with surgical precision, mixing the compounds in a small container from the emergency kit. The resulting material will create a molecular bond that can withstand the extreme pressure and temperature conditions until you can get a proper repair. Anthony watched in fascination. And you developed this technique? Necessity is the mother of invention, Thomas replied. When you've worked with limited resources and experimental conditions, you learn to improvise. The diagnostic system updated. Warning, 6 minutes to critical system failure. Thomas looked up at Anthony. I need complete concentration for this next part. The application must be precise, and I'll have only one attempt. Anthony nodded and stepped back, gesturing for everyone else to do the same. The crowd fell silent as they watched the homeless man bent over the multi-million-dollar vehicle, his hands steady as a surgeon's. The document he pulled up on Anthony's phone would change everything, a patent filing showing Thomas's name as the principal inventor of the very system he was now repairing, dated 5 years earlier. The next 5 minutes passed in tense silence. Thomas worked with methodical precision, his movements economical and confident. The gathered crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, all watching with collective held breath as the homeless man performed what appeared to be technological surgery on one of the world's most exclusive vehicles. Anthony checked his watch compulsively, glancing between the time and the diagnostic readout on his phone. 4 minutes to failure. 3 minutes. The smoking had subsided somewhat, but the warning indicators remained critical. "I need more light," Thomas said quietly, not looking up from his work. 3 phones immediately provided additional illumination, their owners eager to assist this unexpected drama. "Almost there," Thomas murmured. "The microfracture is sealed. Now I need to vent the contaminated coolant and restore system pressure." He reached deeper into the engine compartment, manipulating components with the familiarity of someone who had designed them. A thin stream of iridescent fluid began to drain into a container he had fashioned from the emergency kit's case. "Is that the nano-coolant?" Anthony asked, fascination overcoming his anxiety. "Yes, approximately $20,000 worth," Thomas replied matter-of-factly. "We're saving about 60% of it, which is more than I expected." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "You know the exact cost of the coolant?" "I helped develop it," Thomas said simply. "The price has probably increased since then, but the manufacturing process remains expensive due to the quantum stabilization requirements." The diagnostic alert chimed again. "Warning, 2 minutes to critical system failure." Thomas didn't appear concerned. He continued working steadily, now refilling the system from the emergency kit's reserve coolant. "Standard formulation," he explained as he worked. "Not ideal for the secondary loop, but it will allow safe operation until you can get the specialized nano-coolant replaced. You'll need to keep engine output below 70%. Anthony nodded, watching in amazement as this man, whom he had dismissed so completely earlier, demonstrated mastery over technology that puzzled even the manufacturer's own engineers. 30 seconds remaining, the diagnostic system warned. Thomas made one final adjustment, then carefully secured the access panel. "Start the engine," he instructed. Anthony hesitated. "Are you sure? If there's still a problem." "Start the engine," Thomas repeated with quiet authority. Anthony reached inside the vehicle and pressed the ignition. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the hypercar's engine came to life with a sound unlike any conventional vehicle, a high-pitched whine that quickly modulated to a deep, powerful purr. No smoke emerged. The diagnostic screen flickered, then displayed, "System stabilizing, quantum thrust cooling, functional, performance limited to 70% capacity, service recommended." A spontaneous cheer erupted from the crowd. Several people were recording the moment on their phones. Anthony stared at the diagnostic readout in disbelief. "That's impossible," he muttered. "The manufacturer said this repair couldn't be done in the field." "The manufacturer overcomplicates things to maintain their service monopoly," Thomas replied, wiping his hands on a cloth from the emergency kit. "The repair isn't difficult if you understand the fundamental principles of the system." Anthony looked at Thomas with new respect. "How long will this hold?" "The graphite-infused sealant should maintain integrity for approximately 3 weeks under normal operating conditions," Thomas explained. "More than enough time to schedule proper service. Just remember to keep output below 70%. Anthony nodded, then extended his hand. "Thank you. Sincerely." Thomas accepted the handshake, his expression remaining composed. "You're welcome." The moment might have ended there, a brief connection between two men from vastly different circumstances, but Anthony wasn't finished. His natural curiosity as an engineer and entrepreneur had been thoroughly piqued. "I'd like to understand more about how you did this," Anthony said, "and about your situation. Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable? I'd be happy to give you a ride to my office." Thomas considered the offer for a moment. "I appreciate the invitation, but I don't think—" "Please," Anthony interrupted. "At minimum, I owe you proper compensation for saving my car. And frankly, after what Dr. Chen said, I have about 1,000 questions for you." Reynolds, the security chief who had nearly had Thomas removed, approached cautiously. "Mr. Wright, your investor meeting is in 90 minutes. We should leave soon if you're going to make it." Anthony looked torn between his scheduled obligations and his newfound fascination with Thomas. "Come to the meeting with me," he suggested suddenly. "These investors are backing a new thermal regulation system for quantum computing. Your insights would be invaluable." Thomas shook his head. "I'm hardly dressed for an investor meeting." Anthony considered this, then checked his watch again. "We have time to fix that. Reynolds, call ahead to Bespoke on 5th Avenue. Tell them we need their best available in Thomas's size, ready in 30 minutes. Full professional attire." Reynolds looked surprised, but nodded and stepped away to make the call. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "That's not necessary." "Consider it part of your payment," Anthony insisted. "Plus, I want to see the investors' faces when I tell them who really fixed the unfixable problem with my car." For the first time, Thomas allowed himself a genuine smile. "That might be worth seeing." Anthony grinned back, but then grew serious. "I still don't understand how someone with your talents ended up in these circumstances. What happened after Aerotech?" Thomas's expression clouded. "It's not a pleasant story." "I'd like to hear it anyway," Anthony said. "But first, I have a proposition. A test, if you will." "Another one?" Thomas asked. "I thought I just passed a rather significant test with your car." "You did," Anthony acknowledged. "But I'm not just interested in your engineering skills. I want to see if your insights translate to our current projects." He paused. "Join me for this investor meeting. Listen to our presentation on the new thermal system. If you can identify its flaws and potential improvements, as I suspect you can, I'll offer you a consulting position on the spot." Thomas studied Anthony's face, looking for any sign of insincerity. "And if I'm not interested in your offer?" "Then I'll still compensate you fairly for saving my car and my meeting," Anthony replied. "But something tells me you might be interested in what we're working on." What happened in the next 20 minutes defied all expectations, as the homeless engineer prepared to enter the elite world of tech investors, a world that had once cast him aside without a second thought. The transformation was remarkable. In the private dressing room of Bespoke on 5th Avenue, Thomas emerged looking like an entirely different person. The tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly, emphasizing his still athletic build. His beard had been professionally trimmed, his hair styled. With his commanding height and newly polished appearance, he projected an aura of authority that drew respectful glances from the store staff. Anthony nodded approvingly. "Now you look the part of the brilliant engineer you are." Thomas adjusted his cuffs, his movements precise. "Appearances are deceptive. That's rather the point of this whole experience, isn't it?" "Touché," Anthony conceded. "But in about 40 minutes, you'll have the opportunity to demonstrate that substance matters more than style." The ride to Nexus Innovations headquarters was brief, but significant. Thomas gazed out the window of the luxury SUV, watching as they passed through neighborhoods he usually navigated on foot. The security guards who had nearly removed him earlier now treated him with cautious respect. "I've taken the liberty of having my assistant research your background," Anthony said, scrolling through his tablet. "MIT top of your class, 3 patents before graduation, lead thermal engineer at Space Tech by 26, consultant to Aerotech at 29. He looked up. "Then nothing. You disappeared from the industry completely 3 years ago." Thomas nodded, but offered no explanation. "The Aerotech incident," Anthony continued. You mentioned false accusations. My assistant found reports about a prototype failure, significant investment loss. You were blamed initially. I was the convenient scapegoat, Thomas said quietly. The investigation eventually proved that management had overridden our safety protocols to meet an arbitrary deadline. But by then, the damage was done. But surely other companies would have hired you. Dr. Chen certainly seemed eager to. Thomas smiled ruefully. When you're accused of costing a company millions, other doors close quickly. Add racial profiling, a few strategic rumors about difficult personality and not a team player, and suddenly no one returns your calls. That doesn't explain 3 years of homelessness, Anthony pressed gently. No, Thomas agreed. Depression, a depleted savings account, and a system designed to keep people down once they fall explain that part. He turned from the window to face Anthony directly. Do you know how hard it is to get hired when you have no address? No phone? When your clothes are worn and you can't afford a haircut? The same credentials that impressed you earlier get labeled as suspicious or fabricated when you're homeless. Anthony had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm beginning to understand. They arrived at the gleaming headquarters of Nexus Innovations with 20 minutes to spare before the investor meeting. As they walked through the lobby, employees stopped to stare. Not at Anthony, whom they saw regularly, but at the commanding stranger beside him. Thomas, this is Sophia Reyes, our Chief Technology Officer, Anthony said as an elegant woman in her 50s approached them. Sophia, meet Thomas Johnson. Recognition flashed in her eyes immediately. The Thomas Johnson? From Space Tech? Thomas nodded politely. A lifetime ago, it seems. Your work on quantum thermal regulation was revolutionary, she said, genuine admiration in her voice. We've built upon your foundation for our new systems. That's why he's here, Anthony explained. Thomas just saved my quantum apex with an improvised repair that the manufacturer claimed was impossible. I want his insights on our new thermal project. Sophia's eyes widened. You fixed the secondary cooling loop issue? In the field? With what equipment? Pencil lead and emergency sealant, Thomas replied calmly. Sophia stared at him for a moment, then burst into delighted laughter. That's brilliant. The graphite nanoparticles would create exactly the right molecular bond with the emergency sealant's polymer base. She shook her head in amazement. Why didn't we think of that? Sometimes the simplest solutions are overlooked when you're too close to a problem, Thomas suggested. Anthony checked his watch. The investors are gathering, shall we? As they entered the conference room, conversations quieted. A dozen impeccably dressed investors turned to assess the newcomer. Anthony stepped forward confidently. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin our presentation, I'd like to introduce a special guest. This is Thomas Johnson, the original inventor of the quantum thrust cooling system that revolutionized aerospace engineering 5 years ago, and the man who just saved my supposedly unrepairable car with pencil lead and ingenuity. The implications of what they discovered went far beyond a single car repair, as the true extent of Thomas's genius and the injustice of his circumstances began to dawn on everyone in the room. What happened in the investor meeting became legend in Silicon Valley circles. As Nexus Innovations' team presented their new thermal regulation system for quantum computing, Thomas listened attentively, occasionally making notes on the pad provided. When invited to comment, he spoke for precisely 7 minutes, identifying 3 critical flaws in the current design, proposing elegant solutions for each, and sketching a modification that would increase efficiency by 34% while reducing manufacturing costs. The room fell silent when he finished, then erupted in questions. 2 hours later, as the last investors filed out, all having committed to increased funding, Anthony closed the conference room door and turned to Thomas with undisguised admiration. That was extraordinary, he said. You didn't just improve our design, you transformed it. Sophia says your modifications will put us years ahead of our competition. Thomas nodded modestly. Your team laid a solid foundation. I merely built upon it. Anthony sat across from him. As promised, I'm prepared to offer you a consulting position. Name your price. Thomas considered the offer, his expression thoughtful. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure a consulting role is what I need right now. Then a full position, Director of Engineering, complete creative control. It's not about the title or control, Thomas explained. It's about addressing the larger issue. Which is? How many other brilliant minds are out there, overlooked because of circumstances beyond their control? Thomas leaned forward. In the shelter where I volunteer, I've met former medical researchers, software developers, and mechanical engineers, all struggling with the same systemic barriers that kept me on the streets. Anthony's expression grew serious. You're suggesting something larger than just hiring you. I am. Thomas pulled out several folded papers from his pocket-worn, creased pages covered with precise technical drawings. These are patents I've developed over the past 3 years, sketched on discarded newspapers in the library, solutions to problems your industry hasn't even properly identified yet. Anthony examined the pages with growing astonishment. These are revolutionary, especially this cooling system for quantum neural networks. I had a lot of time to think, Thomas said simply. But imagine what could have been developed if I had proper resources. Now multiply that by all the other talented people being wasted by prejudice and systemic barriers. Anthony set down the papers. What are you proposing? An innovation center, Thomas replied without hesitation. Not just for technology development, but for talent recovery. A place that identifies overlooked brilliance and provides the support necessary to nurture it, regardless of background, appearance, or circumstance. You want me to fund this center? I want us to build it together, Thomas clarified. My technical expertise and lived experience, combined with your resources and industry connections. These patents alone would fund the initial phase. Anthony studied him with new respect. Not revenge. Not even just personal redemption. You want systemic change. Exactly. Thomas's voice grew passionate. The tragedy isn't that I was homeless. It's that society wasted my potential for 3 years and continues to waste the potential of countless others. Anthony extended his hand. Thomas Johnson, I believe you've just found yourself a partner. The patents Thomas had developed while homeless, sketched on discarded newspapers, were worth more than the hypercar he'd just fixed, but their true value lay in the transformation they would spark in an industry that had nearly lost one of its greatest minds. In our world, brilliance appears in unexpected places, often dismissed, overlooked, or discarded based on superficial judgments and systemic bias. The true measure of our society isn't in the success of those already privileged, but in our ability to recognize and nurture genius wherever it exists. This story isn't just about Thomas and Anthony. It's about you and the potential you may be overlooking in others, or that others may be overlooking in you. If this story touched something in you today, subscribe to Beat Stories and join our community dedicated to illuminating moments of extraordinary justice and transformation. Share your experiences in the comments below, and remember, the next world-changing idea might come from the person society has taught you to ignore. Don't miss another moment of inspiration that could change how you see the world forever.
This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of what happens when truth meets visibility. At Beat Stories, we believe exposure is the first step to transformation. Subscribe and stay tuned, because the next story might be yours.